Hello everyone, welcome to lesson 6 of Andy's Coding Tutorials Vue.js Beginners Tutorial. Okay, so if we pick up from where we finished on lesson 5. So what we did is we covered computed properties here, and now what we did here is we added a computed function in here that has to return, it returns a new value. So we're manipulating the data here, and we're returning it, so we're changing it to uppercase, and then we're returning it, and then we're just displaying it here. So the data that's input in the input here goes to the new name here, and whenever this is updated, Vue goes, okay, I need to run that change name because I'm going to display it, so it changes it to uppercase, and it displays it out here. Okay, so what we're going to do in this lesson is we are going to cover template syntax. So if you go to the Vue guide, click on template syntax, and on the left side, click on attributes. Okay, so we're going to cover the dynamic attributes part of template syntax. Okay, so now we've already covered a couple of these things, but we covered them in a slightly different way. So what we'll do is we can see that if you read here, it says the moustaches cannot be used inside HTML attributes. Okay, so when Vue says moustaches, they're talking about here. Okay, so curly braces. Right, and they just happen to look like moustaches. Okay, so what you can do, you can't use them inside for attributes, HTML attributes. Okay, it just doesn't work. You can only use them inside the tag itself. So what you have to do with Vue is you do something like a vbind and then ID. So ID is an attribute, or in here disabled. So that would be vbind disabled, and this would be a dynamic variable. And so it could be true or false or something like that. And what you would do is you might have a button or something like that, and say, okay, if this form is not complete properly, disable the button so the user can't submit the form. So that would be sort of one of the useful things for a dynamic attribute like that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to dive into the code here, and we're going to actually make a dynamic form, and we're just going to do a bit of validation. So that if the user tries to submit a name from like we had before in the list, if the user tries to submit a name but it's not longer than 3 characters, we're going to keep the button disabled. Okay. So what we'll do here is we'll say, all right. So we've got a one input. All right. So we want to have a button. Okay, and that will go back to add names. Add name, and we'll just we'll get rid of this here. Okay, we don't need that. Okay, so we've got our input variable and our button. Okay, and now what we need to do now is we need a variable here, a boolean variable, saying let's just call it button disabled. Okay, and we'll start that at false. Okay, because we don't want the button disabled at the start. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll add that to the button, and we'll say vbind disabled equals button, here we go, button disabled. Okay, so now what's going to happen here, if we check those documents again, vbind disabled here. Okay, so what's going to happen is that whenever this condition is set to false, that button will not be disabled. Okay, and so let's just check that out now in the browser to make sure we've got the right thing. Okay, so that button is not disabled now. Okay, that button is not disabled. Okay, so now that that button is not disabled, if we set that to true, we can test that, and then go back into here. That button is now disabled. See, it's gone grey, and I can't click it now. Okay, so now we know that Vue is dynamically updating the setting the button disabled based on this button disabled boolean variable. Okay, so now what we want to do is let's just make a quick list again like we had before, and we want to have a we want list items, and we need a actual list. Okay, so let's make a list of names again. Okay, let's make a names list. Andy. We use our favorite Bob, and we use say Steve. Okay, alright, well that'll do for now. Okay, and so we want to say in this list we want our, remember, v4, because that's our for loop. So name in names, and as we remember, this can be anything, item in names, but we'll use name in names to make it easy to understand. All right, and so what we want to do is we'll display the name, each one of those names like we had before. And if we remember correctly, we need a add a name function. So let's go back and add that back in again. Okay, this dot names dot push. Remember, we need the this in there. This dot new name. Okay, remember we have to use this because we want to get this instance from the data variables list. Okay, so we add names in there. Okay, so we've got and we'll just make sure we new name equals, and we want to set that to blank so that resets after we've successfully submitted the name to the list. Okay, so if we go back into the browser now, we have got an extra, oops, that's a mistake, that should be an unordered list there, not a list item. There we go. Okay, so there we go. So we've got our list here now. That's where it should be. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to disable this button, right? Okay, so what we want to do now is, now that Vue is disabling that button based on that button disable boolean, we actually need to tell Vue, okay, let's have it check that if every time this input is updated, we want to make sure that it checks to see if there's at least 3 characters in the input. Okay, so then these Andy, Bob, and Steve will pass, but Joe will not. Okay, so we're just doing this for this experiment. Sorry, Joe, but you're not in the list today. Okay, so what we want to do here is let's get rid of this computed because we don't want that. And now there's a couple of ways you can do this, but I'll do it this way. So let's do check name length. Okay, just this will be easy to understand here, and we'll use a method. Oops, get that like that. Okay, now we want to check if, let's make an if statement. This dot new name dot length is less than 3. Okay, this dot button disabled equals true. Okay, now if it's anything else, we want to say this dot button disabled equals false. So remember, 3 and above, so anything less than 3 we want to disable it. Anything over 3 we want to allow the button to be submitted. Okay, so now it's not doing anything. Now if we go into here, we haven't enabled that. Okay, so just see if we can enable a button. We haven't added this add name. Okay, so we need to do, remember, we're going to do v on click equals here add name. Okay, and remember that was v on, but what we're going to do is we're always going to do this shorthand at click. Okay, so we want test, and that's added back in there. Okay, so we've got it working how we want it to work now. Alright, so what do we need to do to have Vue check this name length every time something's inputted? Alright, so let's do v on input equals check name length. Okay, now if we remember from here, v on, what we can do is we can change that again to at input, and that'll give us the same as at click and at input because it's an event. Okay, so we're checking for event here. Okay, so let's have a look. So if this name is less than 3, okay, we should actually start with, what we should do is start it as disabled as true, because when we start there's no data, so it should be disabled by default. Okay, so it's disabled by default now. So let's go let's try and write a name. John. J-O-H. And now we're at 3, so it's allowing us to submit it now, so we can submit it. But if we go J-O, sorry Joe again, we can't submit anything. So we go J-O-N, we're fine, we're good to go. David, we're okay about. So what we're doing there is we're just dynamically checking whenever there's an input to this input, so whenever a key is pressed, something like that, whenever that's pressed, Vue will go, okay, run this function, run this method. Okay, check name length. I'm going to say is this dot new name length less than 3? Okay, if it's less than 3, we need to keep this. We need to make sure that's disabled. If it's 3 or above, 3 or greater than 3, then it should be set to false, so we can submit. Okay, so that's what we wanted to basically cover in this tutorial. And what we're going to do in the next one is we're going to use these vbind. We're going to use a few of these vbinds and other things like that, and we're going to make a form where we can validate a form more thoroughly. And what we'll do is we'll get the color to change and stuff like that, all using these vbinds and inputs and clicks and that, and we'll bring it all together to make it look like something that's quite useful that you will use in a real life web application. You know, like a contact form. You want to make sure that all of the fields are filled in before the user submits the contact form or something like that. So as usual, this code will be linked below in box below, and that will be with the GitHub link. And if you have any comments or anything about the tutorial, or if you'd like some, just improvements, or if you'd like something specifically covered, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much.